Welcome to Conversations with the Authors.
Welcome back to Conversations with the Authors. I'm your host, Daniel.
I'm Daryl.
I'm Sandra.
Today we're going to talk about something I think a lot of writers sort of battle with, and we're going to talk about consistency. Consistency in your storytelling, consistency in your narrative, but consistency also, I think, in your style. In the last few podcasts, we talked about continuity. Continuity, of course, is, at least I see it, it's making sure that something is the same as it was in the previous scene. Right, Dad? Right,
yeah, and it's related to something we call unity, when you keep a story unified by common factors.
Right. Mm-hmm. And Sandra, continuity is something that you guys had to focus on when writing How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, your highly rated, Eric Hoffer nominated sci-fi fantasy novel. Yes?
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true.
But consistency, Daryl, Sandra, you could say is the same but also different. Because in my opinion, consistency can also be consistency of style.
It's multifaceted.
Right, and by that I mean, when you're writing a story, a narrative, whatever language or however you decide to tell your story, should be the way you tell your story. Mm-hmm. And as an author, you have to decide on what your voice is going to be. And we talked about finding your voice in one of our earlier podcasts. What kind of storyteller are you? Mm-hmm. Stay that storyteller is kind of what I'm trying to get at, Mm-hmm. You don't start off as sort of a serious storyteller and suddenly now everything is jokes and yokes and, changing horses midstream. And that's okay, but I think not in the same story, right?
You have to mean to do what you do. If that's what you meant to do, if that's the direction we're going, that's fine. Right. But if you do it and you don't know that you did it, then you've made a grievous mistake.
Yes.
Now, I just to hit your point there, you define your style and your tone. You're either going to write it formal, mm-hmm. you're writing it informal, or it's academic. Which kind of story are you writing? Is it serious? Is it casual? Is it informative? But whatever style or tone that you take, just make sure you stick with that, unless you actually mean to do that. It reminds me of a definition of a gentleman that I read once. He said a gentleman is a person who does not insult you by accident. Because they actually know what they're doing and they're aware of what they do. So be aware of what you do. And with inconsistencies, there are lots of points of inconsistency that we can focus on, and whether it's storytelling or whether it's tense or points of view, there are lots of things.
Right. I think and it is. Okay, so let me say it this way. I started out in screenwriting. Right. So, as I often try to illustrate, a script is essentially an instruction manual for your movie, right?
Yeah.
So you guys wrote a screenplay for How Nicholas Became Santa Claus. Mm-hmm. And there's a big difference between the script and the book. That being, it's written in present tense.
Right. The script, and you'll notice that ordinarily a script is written in the present tense.
Right. Mm-hmm. And if you ever read instructions to anything, it will always be in present tense, mm-hmm. because the script is being acted out in real time.
In present, yes.
Mm-hmm. So when writing Nicholas, the book was different. So how did you maintain consistency?
Let's jump back to an old cliche, an opening of your classic story. Mm-hmm. Once upon a time, there was a man who lived in a castle. If you notice when I said that, I'm referring to the past, once upon a time. And so I might say, he was a big man, but he was a small thinker. He had lots of enemies. Notice I use had and was.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the tense that I'm using, and so I'm showing you that I'm using the past tense, and my point of view is the point of view of the person who's telling a story. Either you're in the story and you're telling your history. I laid there and I waited, or he laid there and he waited for rescue.
Right.
See, one is past tense, one is present tense. Now, if it were a script, I stopped and I looked. I saw nothing. That's a script. That's present tense. Or you might go, in a story, you might say, he had stopped and he looked and he saw nothing. All of that's past tense. Right. So the only thing I'm telling people is if you start out with a tense, continue with that tense unless the story calls for you to change that.
Right. So
okay. So it's consistent.
Keep it intense.
Or intense, right?
But you know what I mean. I mean, and you're right. When doing a script, it's always, like I said, it's in the moment. So even when you're writing for the characters, it's always present time because it's in the moment. You're really. I'd be hard pressed to find a script that's written in past or future tense.
Yeah, and I think points of view, I think, are important too. And when I mean points of view, I mean the I, right, which is first person, and you, which is second person, and them, right, which is third person. Right. Make sure you keep consistency with that because sometimes you can confuse people. Yeah. I remember talking to one person once, and they were telling me about somebody else, and I started getting confused because they said, you can't lie to me, and you should never do that. And I just hate it when you do that. And I'm thinking to myself, are they still talking about that other person? Or are they talking about me? You know, and she said, oh, no, I'm talking about them. But see, there was that inconsistency of point of view using the you, and people get confused sometimes. Who are you talking about?
Your overuse of pronouns can really cause confusion.
Right.
Sometimes you got to actually use a proper noun to name somebody, right?
Exactly.
It's good to understand, you can say he, him a lot, you can say I a lot, but after a while, it can get very confusing because now I don't know which I we're talking about.
How many letters, and I'm not just talking about gender pronouns, but I'm talking about how many letters have you ever written, or have read rather, where somebody had so many pronouns in it, you didn't know who they were talking about.
Exactly, yes.
You didn't know what they were talking about.
And for those of you who don't know, for those new readers who are still trying to get through the basics, a pronoun is that which renames the noun being the subject, the person, the thing, or the idea. So he, she, it, they, that,
and them. Sure.
Them.
Person, place, or thing.
And your pronoun would be, instead of, for instance, Daryl would be he, Daryl is Daryl. Sandra is Sandra instead of her.
But after you get deep into a recitation, and you keep using pronouns, and you never refer back to the person you were talking about, people start to get confused.
Right.
Who are you talking about? You said she, he, and you, but this went on for a long time. Who are you really talking about?
And there have been times when I've read a page or two or three, and it continually, and this is not with Nicholas, this is with other books, where the pronoun will continue to be, he said this, and then she said that, and then he said, and there are now 4 or 5 people in the party, and it's still continuing back and forth, and that's when you start confusing. Now I don't know if you're referring to John, or Tim, or Cindy, or, the dog Fido.
Pronouns usually refer back to the last named thing or person that you use. And if you get several pronouns down the line, you don't know what that pronoun is referring back to.
Exactly. For instance, when we're writing a script, for instance, when a new character comes into the scene, or anything was introduced to the script, it's first capitalized, so we can call attention to it in the quote unquote instructions to the people who are building this film, to know, hey, this person has entered. So when you have now 5, 6, 7 characters, if we're watching the Avengers, we're not going to refer to every Avenger gender is he, her, them, it, they, because now we're getting confused. Who's talking? Is it Tony? Is it Black Widow? Is it the Hulk? Right?
Yeah. And if I'm going to be honest, in our story, we had a dog in the story. Mm-hmm. And the dog was a he. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of drifted, and then it was a she. Mm-hmm. And I had to really go back through the whole story and make sure that all pronouns were consistent,
right? Because
you don't want to. And it's common when you're doing animals like horses or dogs and things, because you call it a he, it's a he, it's a he, it's a he, right. And then suddenly, after a few days, after you put the story down and come back, it becomes a she or a she.
Right. And I think also, we get used to if you have pets, you tend to get used to calling your pet by whatever he or she is, and when you go back to your writing, now you're thinking of your own pet, and you're starting to refer to it at the same pronoun. But then we have something in inconsistency in style, inconsistency in formatting, which is a style. But this is how are you? This is the how are you writing your story in actually the physical format in which you're putting your story out.
And style and tone refers to the seriousness, whether it's casual or informative, and so you're writing to suit your audience, and what purpose is it for? So you don't want to start out a kid's story, for instance, sounding like Dr. Seuss, and then next thing you sound like you've written an insurance policy.
Right.
It has to
15% or more.
Right.
You found you saved 15% or more in the story, but now we don't know what what's going on.
And you know what? And the other thing is this, that you can look this up, but in most very popular stories and some of your bestsellers are written for a third or fourth grader. Yes. It's written at that level. So, believe it or not, that's the best level to write at. And so, you don't sound like a kid. You're not trying to impress people with your vocabulary. What you're trying to do is to get the story across so they can understand. So most popular stories and most award-winning stories are written at the fifth grade level.
Now, Sandy, I'm sorry, one of the main points of being consistent is outline. You have an outline for Nicholas.
I have several outlines for Nicholas. Some of them are for particular scenes, especially for the meeting scenes, where we have lots of people or lots of oddlings and people, and I have to keep straight who's talking and who's not talking and what are they talking about, and keeping the proper languages correct.
Yeah, outline serves a lot of purpose.
Right.
And you have a clear structure that'll keep your writing organized and on track. And it kind of prevents you from veering off into unrelated topics.
Right.
So it's like a Christmas tree or a skeleton that you build on.
Right.
And it takes you to a certain point.
Right. And and I'm going to say it because
please outline.
This is relevant. Even though our podcast, dear listeners and readers, is not scripted, we do have an outline, and these are things I have that we want to touch upon. For instance, I always say somewhere in the podcast, thank you, dear listeners and readers, for pressing the play button, because it's important to us. And I always say thank you, Alexander Nakarada, for this beautiful music that you add to the show, because not only is it part of the outcome, but I'm genuinely thankful. And I want to make sure that I thank you for tuning in and listening, because we like you being part of the conversation, and I love our intro. I think it's great. So it's important to have an outline so you know where you're going.
So you don't keep going in circles. Right. An outline is a map.
Yes.
It's from Chicago to New York, know. It tells you how to get there. You don't want to wind up, somewhere else and
continually recalculating.
In the boondocks somewhere.
Right.
Yeah, right. So it's directions for you.
Right. And when it comes to speaking, doing speeches or what have you, outlines are good. They just make sure that they help you to make sure you hit the point. You don't necessarily have to hit them in order, but you do have to hit them. And what do you think would be the most important thing when it comes to consistency in writing?
Revise and edit.
Sandy.
Okay, right?
I want to start off with you on this. Now, you started writing this story a long time ago. We were babies. And you had to revise your writing and your editing several times, especially the closer you got to publication.
I have approximately 50.
Right. And you know, not I'm going to ask because it is important, and some people might not know this, and I know we talked about this before, but why? Why is it so important to revise? Why is it so important to edit?
Because just as a person grows, your characters in your story grow.
Right.
And as your characters in your story grow, they learn to interact with each other.
Right.
And that interaction has to develop. It has to become less juvenile.
Right.
You know, and I think whenever we write something, I'm talking about, when I say we, I'm talking about writers in general.
Yes.
Sometimes we think we were the next Shakespeare, and we wrote something really, really great. To revise and edit, part of that is to put that down. Put it down, come back a week later, and read it again, and see if you like it. Sometimes you may say, "Oh my God, who wrote this? This is great," or you may say, "This is horrible."
You know,
what was I thinking about?
It's funny because,
but just as important as our reading it is my giving it to you to say, what did I miss?
Right.
Or what am I doing wrong?
Objective
And doing
view.
the same thing with Daddy. Because when I'm reading it and writing
It's the
it,
greatest
it's
thing
no
ever.
longer objective because my brain is telling me
This
that
is
I
good.
wrote exactly what I intended to write.
you know, it makes me think of that scene from The Christmas Story where Ralphie's writing his essay for class, and I think he's writing the best story ever, and he turns it in, and the teacher is cooing over him, and A+, and it's like a C. And I feel like that was me
Or an
when I was
F.
in elementary school. Like, I was writing. I feel like I could get my point across well, but as I got older, I realized I could definitely looking back at them, I could definitely get my point across better now. And just as you were saying, you know, as the story evolves and as you evolve, we draw from things, our experiences, right?
Yeah.
Dan, Daryl?
So I think going hand in hand with revise and edit really is to proofread very carefully.
Yes.
Because you'll find that sometimes you'll put words down that are homonyms rather than the word that you wanted to use.
Yes.
Like
Two and two.
he's too big,
Yes.
and you put T-O rather than T-O-O. Or that it's let's go over there.
Yes.
And instead of THERE, you went THEIR. You know, and sometimes that just slips out of your brain, and you have to really take a look at those things and read it over with a fine tooth comb. Right. You know, so I remember writing something, and it was one word, and I put it as two words, and it bugged me for months until I could find it in there so I could get it right.
Yes. And just as you were saying, Ma, you were saying that you would hand the story to me, and she says that because I was the primary editor on the original manuscript. When you're proofreading, read it out loud. One of the tricks you can do when you're proofreading is, and I wouldn't say do this with the whole book because it's going to take a long time, but you can read your sentences backwards. Read them from the last word to the first word in the sentence or the paragraph, and it forces your brain to pay attention, because we do fall into commonalities. We do sometimes slip up, and that happens. But also, like Ma was saying when she passed the manuscript to me, pass it to a friend, pass it to your family member, someone you trust, and let them read it. Let them see what you don't see.
What I found out, and I think writers of all ages, in all ages, have known this, you know, for eons, is that sometimes your brain will fill in the gaps. So you'll write a sentence and it seems perfectly fine, and then somebody else will read it and say there's a word missing. Your brain filled that in, so you didn't even see it.
Yes.
You know, so
I found as a dyslexic writer that my brain would horribly do that. Right. When I say horribly, I mean I would sometimes go back and read something and It looked like a scramblegram from some
Right,
super
right.
puzzle you were supposed to read, or the back end of the sentence was in the middle, and the middle end of the sentence was at the back end, and the front end of the sentence was completely on a different line or a different paragraph.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to call you or Daddy and say, I need help unscrambling this because my brain is telling me it's written correctly and it isn't.
I'll tell you, sometimes just a contradictory information. Your character started out a blonde, and next thing you know, he's got red hair. So you have to watch that stuff. Yeah.
I tell you, the first time that I found out that dyslexic reading was horrible was when Daddy bought me a computer that could read.
Yes.
And the computer's reading, and I'm reading the same line, and I'm going, why the hell is the computer so stupid?
Yes, but just like with Harmon,
And it wasn't.
read with your computer if it's reading out loud. Read with your children. Read with your family. Read How Nicholas Became Santa Claus. If you want a good example of consistency and storytelling and narrative and perspective for How Nicholas Became Santa Claus, you can check out our website at troopbooks.com. You can check out our Instagram, our X, our Facebook at Troop Books, our TikTok, and hopefully next time, send us an email, let us know what you like, and we'll talk to you next time on Conversations with the Authors.